Welcome to episode 475 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Grace Winburn.
Michael O'Malley.
In today's episode, we're going to be talking about movies that we saw this week in part one. And in part two, we're going to be kicking off our Young Critics, yearly favorite, our Young Critics Watch Old Movie Series, version 10, our 10th Young Critics Watch Old Movie Series.
Wow.
With 1921's A Phantom Carriage, which I think I mentioned it at the end of the episode last week, but for those who maybe didn't get that far. The Phantom Carriage, for the longest time, we had like a poll where people could vote on. We would suggest movies, and then people would vote on the ones we would talk about for the Young Critics series. And I think Phantom Carriage, out of the 10 years, was probably on the ballot at least 6 or 7 of those years. And so we kind of were just like, you know what, screw it, we're just gonna do it. So we'll get into that in part two, but let's dive into part one because we got a bunch of exciting recent releases. The first one, which I believe is in theaters now, if you're so lucky to have it, but it's pretty well wide released. It's A24; they're doing a decent job of getting it out there. But that is I Saw the TV Glow, which is the latest from Jane Schoenbrunn, who, what was their last? We're All Going to the World's Fair was their first feature. And just the kind of plot line that I got here on Letterboxd: teenager Owen is just trying to make it through life in the suburbs when his classmate introduces him to a mysterious late-night young adult TV show, a vision of a supernatural world beneath their own. In the pale glow of the television, Owen's view of reality begins to crack. Michael, you also saw this movie. I'm gonna leave it to you. I really liked your review that you had on Letterboxd.
Yeah, I really like this movie. I think it's awesome. In fact, I liked We're All Going to the World's Fair quite a bit, and I think that this movie picks up on what's made that movie interesting in some regards, having to do with isolation and body image and that self-conceptualization, how you present yourself versus what you understand about yourself interiorly. That's all going on in I Saw the World's Fair, or that's all going on in We're All Going to the World's Fair. It's really honed in I Saw the TV Glow, which, as you kind of alluded to in your the plot summary, is kind of about someone and their friend in initially junior high and then high school discovering a TV show, and it's set in the 90s, so it's that the end of the era right before everyone could just
I think it's 1996.
Yeah, so it's the end of the era when you could just buy the DVDs or especially streaming, where television shows became I feel a lot more permanent. It's the time period when you'd have to record TV shows or catch reruns in the summer, and if you were getting into a show in the middle of its run, you had to kind of piece together what had happened. And it's also in the 90s you had things Buffy was just about to get started. The X-Files was kind of at the height of its run in the mid 90s. But those kind of shows that are have these kind of obsessive cult followings that also kind of build a mythology around, the kind of recurring characters and stuff. And a lot of this movie is kind of just I don't want to call it nostalgic, because there's a point in the movie that I really like later on when Owen, as an adult, tries to revisit these. The Pink Opaque is the name of the TV show. He tries to revisit the Pink Opaque, and it looks like trash, and he doesn't connect to it at all. But I do think that there is an element that, unlike most nostalgia, whatever, Stranger Things or those Fear Street movies, unlike a lot of nostalgia baiting millennial stuff, this is really keyed into the tactility and the significance, almost spiritual significance of the ways you had to interpret and engage with media then, like the ephemerality of TV, like now most people start a show at season 1, episode 1, and just like go straight through. You know, that's how it's all designed. It's all there for you to be readily accessible. Although I guess now we're kind of entering in a new phase where streamers start to like just delete shows, which is maybe like an interesting ephemerality that we're rediscovering about TV. But like, especially then, most of your engagement with a cultural object like television that was broadcast was in your mind and in the conversations that you had with other people. And I think this movie does
Well, and
really
especially with like, sorry to interrupt, but like, especially with something like X-Files, like it was a very early internet message board community. And so like, you know, people who had access to the internet at that point were able to like talk about it. But kind of what you see in this movie is like those, you know, people who maybe don't have access to just be on the internet and message boards, like they're kind of just to a degree feeling like they're on a lone island as, oh, I'm the
yeah.
only one watching the show.
Even though like what's wild is like if you look at the viewership numbers of like the X-Files, like that was one of the top shows on Fox, like at the height of its popularity. But you could conceivably be the only person in your school who was into the X-Files. Like it's not like an outside, even though there's like millions of other people. And I think that that's really easy to forget now that like fandom is this like behemoth annoying thing in like pop culture now. But like for a while, like fandom like was like these islands of people, usually like really small groups of people who kind of just like mutually found connection and meaning in the shows that they watched. And there wasn't a lot of infrastructure to just like connect it unless you went to like a con or unless you had an internet connection and could like get on a message board. And I think that this movie, like the movie begins with this kid in like is he in 8th grade or 7th grade or something like that at the beginning of the movie?
He's in sixth or seventh grade.
Yeah,
One of those.
he sees ads for the Pink Opaque and thinks, "Wow, that must be really cool," but can never watch it. And I remember having that experience, not just with television but with movies too, because when you're a kid, like the world around you is so curated and you have so little power to influence the world around you. And then the next encounter that he has with the Pink Opaque is not the show itself, but this other character. I'm blanking on her name at the moment. But
Maddie.
Maddie, yeah. So the other kind of main character is reading an episode guide to the show and tells him about it.
Which honestly is just like I love that detail. Like it reminded me of not only episode guides for television shows, but also like the guides for like video games like Halo and stuff that you would get. Like that's what I was thinking of. I was like, oh my god, I don't think they make those at all anymore.
No, because it's all like through IGN or you can just go on IMDb or whatever. But I don't know, like so like the next encounter that he has is with the episode guide where the other like where Maddie just tells him like, here's what the show's like. Oh, it's a YA show. It's on the kids network, but it's too scary for the kids, so they only show it at 10 o'clock at night. And he's not allowed to stay up that late, and so he just can't watch the show unless he sneaks out and watches it at Maddie's house, which he ends up doing eventually. And anyway, it just kind of escalates from there. And I guess like this movie would be remarkable just for like capturing that kind of like weird, like dreamlike feeling of like old media where most of what you engaged with was outside of the media and like imagining and like almost like conjuring. Like there's like a sort of spiritual element of like the thing that you engage with, you do at most once a week for like an hour, almost like church or something. And the rest of it is you thinking about it and meditating and like kind of building a narrative, like, or speculative questions or that sort of thing. Like the movie captures that really well. And I think it would be remarkable for that. But like the really cool thing is the way that it picks up the stuff from We're All Going to the World's Fair in terms of like a embodied identity, you know, because like kind of like We're All Going to the World's Fair, this kind of reveals itself to be, as the movie goes on, like a narrative about transness, because Owen, as I say but it's kind of revealed later on that like, you know, Owen, you know, has maybe like has like feelings about like his gender and presentation that he has not sorted out. I guess I'll just keep
Yeah,
using he because the
let's.
movie doesn't, or
Yeah,
they.
there's a lot of dysphoria is a big theme in this. I say let's put a
Yeah.
pin in Owen's gender identity though, because I think there's something there. But yeah, I think the he pronoun is fine for
Yeah, because
the.
he presents as male the whole movie pretty much, but the movie complicates his um, both his sexuality and his gender, because as he's getting to know Maddie is talking about how she's into girls,
Mhm.
and there's a moment which I think is in the trailers because this was familiar to me where she's like, "Do you like girls or boys?" And he just says, "I like TV shows." But then he goes on to say how he feels kind of like that he's been scooped and hollowed out, and he's afraid to look at what he is inside.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't know the ways that he seems to glom onto this like Buffy style TV show almost as a externalization of like some of those feelings, and the ways that his connection with the TV show feels like him also like his outlet for the kind of things about himself that he's like kind of afraid to open up as he's a teenager. Like I think that's what makes this really special, because it's one thing to be kind of like talking about, wow, media used to be like this and it was so different. But I think it's another thing, and a much more like profound thing, to be talking about like why were things meaningful to people back then. um and I think that like this movie does really neat and interesting and like very soulful exploration of one thing that was meaningful about these movies was they allow, or this media, and the way that you could kind of build up narratives around media with communities of fans, is the way that it allowed for like a kind of covert exploration of things that like mainstream suburban life did not typically allow space for. Um, and there's a big theme throughout the movie of like the kind of blanket like default mode of suburbia being like this just uh relentless normalizing force. Like you must be this way. Like by the time Owen's an adult, he's like working with Connor O'Malley of all people. Uh, like
what a what a like a the first time you see Connor O'Malley, like what a
oh my
jump scare
gosh,
to a degree.
it's a true amazing moment that I don't think we should spoil.
Yeah.
But I don't know, like you know the way that the suburbs isolate people geographically because you're all in these little houses separated by like streets and yards and stuff is like a function of also how it isolates people from difference and from understanding the broader world. And his Owen's like connection to this media is almost like um, it's like a shattering of that world, like a brief shattering of that world every time he watches it. Um, that then he just returns to normal after the show, concludes for that time that he's watching it. But by the end of as an adult, like end of the movie as an adult, like it's becoming less and less tenable on like a psychological and emotional scale to have that like conformity and like I'm just working like what I'm supposed to do.
Hmm.
Like, and there's moments increasingly near the end of the movie where there's like that norm is broken. Like Maddie runs off at one point in the movie for years, and then at one point she comes back, and that's kind of like the inciting incident, um, and starts like a kind of train of events that increasingly rattle the kind of
It
uh,
be,
stability of like his place within like
and
kind of like
that's
heteronormative
yeah.
cisgendered suburban.
Well, and that's also when just on a more like cinematic level, like that's where the film really dives into this like I think like people like to label this a lot with movies, but I feel like this is probably the best example of a non-David Lynch like Lynchian shift
Yeah, big
that I've
Twin Peaks
seen.
The Return vibe.
Hmm.
In particular, the last episode of The Return, where there's this kind of like facade that like you get little almost like really disruptive little like glimpses like behind this facade. Um and the movie does this quite a bit, and like it starts merging like digital with like this kind of old analog like staticky stuff in a way that is just very unsettling.
Yeah.
Um and I don't know. This movie rocks. I could keep talking about it, kind of like recapping like the interesting moments for me, but I don't know.
Yeah,
Zach, you should talk some more.
I can't remember who. I don't think it might have been in your review, so I credit you if it was you. But I saw somewhere, um, this is like one of the most. This was like a very seminal piece of work. Like in the midst of this, while watching this, I was like, this is a like this is a moment film. Like this is something that like usually when you're watching something, I don't know, at least for me, um like I might enjoy it that first time through, but it would be that second or third viewing, especially like after reading stuff, talking through it, where I start to like really like, especially with the part we're talking about where it really like turns, and like this movie really became something seminal. But in the quote I'm thinking about is, somebody said, this kind of, it was uh like what Moonlight was a couple years ago. Less about like this is a pivotal movie, representation of transness in film, but more just, I think, like Barry Jenkins with that movie came in with just this like incredibly assured, singular, like confident vision. Like
Yeah.
you watch Moonlight, and he directs that thing like this is his 10th movie. Like you don't know that this is only his like second feature film. And I
Yeah.
feel like Schoenbrunn in this movie is very much the same. Like this is a very confident movie,
Yeah.
and they have such a handle on the storytelling. Every piece of this film seems so intentional, like from the lighting to you shift from, they're shooting in film, but like you also have these moments like we're talking about this show, The Pink Opaque, where it looks like a show that was filmed like in the 90s, that's on
It's
a
really credible.
VHS.
Like, and they do stuff
Yeah.
that's kind of clever. Like they use the Buffy font, like
Yeah.
on the title cards and stuff like that. But yeah,
But
it's really credible as like the kind of show you would have caught on like UPN or something.
yeah, but like I like just watching this, I was just like this is something a step above. I haven't seen something, especially for like a younger filmmaker, like as really self-assured as this in a long time. Like this.
There are just some like, especially towards the end, like there are some like some sequences where it is just like galaxy brained, like I can't
Mhm.
believe that they're pulling this off sort of thing. Like the sequence when Maddie comes back, and there's a very long sequence where Maddie is just talking at
Yeah, she's
Owen. It's a
monologuing.
monologue, and it just keeps going and going, and like like if I describe the things that she's talking about, it would sound ludicrous, but the way
Mhm.
that it is done in the movie is like you're being sucked into a like an alternate dimension, like as she is doing that. um
And that's why like like even moments like that really felt like watching something from David Lynch, because it's just like you described it, it's this monologue, and if we describe what they're talking about, you're just kind of like, okay. But the way it's shot, the way it's lit, the way like how like committed in that scene the actor is, like it just feels like something like bending time.
yeah,
It's so like truly cinematic.
there's another sequence that's very near this one, where they're at a bar, um like a showroom kind of thing, like because
Like
there's bands playing, like
it's like a dive bar though, yeah.
yeah. But and so like as Owen and Maddie are having this conversation, there's like a band playing in the scene is like bookended, almost again like almost like a Twin Peaks kind of thing. Or like if you did you ever watch Buffy? They had like a club where they would go to where there'd be like
Hmm.
little musical sequences too. What was that called?
I don't
I
remember.
don't know, but it's kind of like that too if you want to go down that route. But the sequence is bookended by these really long takes of just the bands performing.
Hmm.
And the first band is like this like synthy kind of like I don't know. I think Phoebe Bridgers is in this movie. Is she the one performing at
Hmm.
that point?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Phoebe
So it's
Bridgers
like
is there.
Phoebe Bridgers playing the first one, and it's kind of like low key, melancholy, like shoegazy, synthy sort of something. And then the second band that plays, the one that plays after the scene, is like this like hard rock, like screaming band. I think they're called King Woman.
Mm-hmm.
I looked them up afterwards, and there's a shot that is like a it's like an extreme close up of the singer's face in profile, just screaming into the microphone. And that shot goes on longer than you can imagine. Like it must be like a 3 or 4 minute shot of this woman just like screaming the hell out of like whatever song this is into the mic. And
Yeah.
again, like that's kind of like an okay, like if I describe it, it's like okay, but the way that is done is just rattling and like transfixing, because the way it's framed, where you can't always quite see the entirety of her face, and she's like kind of moving in and out of frame but always coming back into like yell into the mic. I don't know, like there's just so many like swinging for the fences shots near the end of this movie that just are just wild.
It's a movie that like the second I got home after I saw it, we're recording this on Monday. I saw it on Sunday. The minute I got home, I immediately like one was scouring Letterboxd for reviews and stuff, but then also just scouring for out like just more traditional like reviews and a lot of interviews with Jane Schoenbrunn.
Great interview subject, by the way. They're always really interesting.
Yeah, the one the one I really liked was the interview they did with Variety, which I thought was really fascinating. But that really, because it's a movie, I'll admit it's similar to what I talked about a couple weeks ago with The People's Joker. Like a lot of like the trans experience stuff, just just kind of goes over my head, just because it's not something that I've personally engaged with, or I know a few trans people, but it's not something that like extensively I have exposure to, of just like what the what that experience is for them kind of mentally as they're kind of going through it, and like how they're feeling about things. It's been more periphery, like literature, things like that, where I've experienced that. And so really reading through a lot of that and how this movie is kind of exploring that really opens it up a lot, where I just continued to grow an appreciation of it afterwards. And like one of the things I was thinking about was not super spoilery, but like the end of the movie, I like the one thing I just kind of questioned was like the very very end of the movie, because the very very like you have this.
Are you talking about the party?
Yeah, like you have this very like surrealist sequence where he's in the bathroom that you're kind of like, if it just ended there, it would be like fuck. And then it breaks, but then it doesn't end there, and it ends with him kind of running through this party, and stuff. Because it kind of you feel like it's going to end a couple times, that it just never does.
Yeah.
But reading a couple interpretations of that, I kind of pulled back my, not criticism, but kind of questioning of like why end it in that fashion, because like there's just like a lot of like I think the full interpretation that it seems like for the character of Owen, going back to like how he would identify like what his gender identity would be, was it seems like he's somebody who like probably was trans, like wanted, like probably needed to explore that, or like, but was unable to, because he was able to explore that to a degree through this TV show, but like because of just the nature of where he was, whether the suburbs.
Fred Durst is his dad, by the way.
Yeah, Fred Durst is kind of a strict.
You can't come out to Fred Durst for sure.
Kind of a stricter upbringing. Just not really like any avenues, like there, not really any queer spaces where like that could be like he could like really be given a like a runway to kind of explore his sexuality and his identity. Like the reading I found of this ending is like somebody who the plot line with Maddie kind of ends with her very much going like, let's go, like take my hand, let's go, and him rejecting that. And so like ending it with this person who probably was trans, but in just was never really given the door opening to explore that. Somebody, and then now late in life is like, it's like just inside is exploding because, it's like time has passed and they realize that this part of them has kind of like suffered and died inside because they never really opened the door to that. Like, it just becomes so tragic. And something that I didn't really fully understand while watching it, but it's that kind of reading to it is going to be fascinating because I'm dying to rewatch this movie.
Yeah, there's like so much pain in this movie. I think specifically about that, like specifically like the realization that you could have been somebody different and maybe someone who
Mm-hmm.
would have been more meaningful, like had a more meaningful existence, but you are convinced that it's too late to
Mm-hmm.
explore that, whether or not that's actually true. Um, and I think that struck a chord with a lot of people. Like I feel like that a little bit, not as like a trans person, but just I think in a lot of ways, um, I had like a, growing up in the suburbs or whatever, you really aren't given like a lot of options unless you try to go out and seek them yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
after a while, it does kind of feel like too late to explore that. And I'm doing fine, but I can imagine like alternate versions of myself that never existed. And sometimes I think about like, well, what would have that been? And if I were someone who was dealing with like dysphoria or intense uh, dissatisfaction or alienation with my current existence, like the knowledge of I could have been somebody different would be excruciating.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this movie really captures that. I think it's really struck a chord with people too. Every once in a while, there's like movies that, whether they're good or bad movies, just seems to create just an outpouring of like really impassioned writing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes I don't always understand why people are so impassioned about like a month or two ago when Civil War came out,
Mm-hmm.
that produced a lot of very angry, impassioned writing that I don't really know that I connected to. Everything Everywhere All at Once is another kind of one where I was like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
not sure why people are outpouring either positively or negatively about that. And I saw The TV Glow is another one of these movies that has really struck a chord that like people, the reviews people have of this, especially on like Letterboxd and like forum kind of places like that,
Mm-hmm.
are like effusive in like personally connecting with the film. And I think like for once, like I'm on the I don't want to say I'm on the inside of that because I'm not like sharing the experiences that people, but I get like this is like
Mm-hmm.
unlike Civil War, which I thought was just kind of moderately interesting. Um, I'm looking at this movie and like I get like why this movie would inspire all of this writing. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
just that kind of movie where it just feels endlessly um like rich, and just the ways that it refracts like all different sorts of visions into it. Um, I don't know. This is, probably going to be one of my, if not the favorite movie of the year, like one of my favorite movies of the year, just
Yeah.
because it's just so compelling.
That's the last. I was just gonna say, like, if you have the opportunity, you should go see I Saw the TV Glow. It's not only, I think, will be one of the top movies of the year, but it seems to be a movie that I think will continue to just grow in appreciation, and it'll be one of those numbers of years later when you're reflecting back on, oh, the movies of 2024. I think this will be a movie that's continuing to impact past just the cycle of the year in movies type thing.
Yeah, totally.
Uh,
It's also like, if you're like kind of doing the like mental like calculus of should I see this in the theater or not, like the sound design and music of this movie is like great to be cocooned in.
see it in a theater.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, cool. Grace, would you like to talk about another piece of trans art from this year that I feel like is also incredibly interesting?
Yes, absolutely. I had you guys muted the entire time because I didn't want to hear anything. I didn't want
Fine.
anything spoiled for me. I am so excited to see I Saw the TV Glow. In the meantime, I saw The People's Joker, Vera Drew's The People's Joker. What a fun piece of parody satire, just a send up of all things Batman. in such a, let's see, where to start, like where to begin. This is told from Vera's perspective, or like this is her coming out story set
like
against
half autobiography, half like Batman.
Yeah. But it's like it's set against the familiar IP of comic books, comic book movies, and specifically Batman.
Mm-hmm.
Very recognizable. Everybody has a connection in some way, shape, or form to Batman at any iteration. I do. I used to go to the comic book stores and pick up comic books all the time. And so I definitely, felt comfortable in this world. There were names and phrases and places that all felt very familiar. So I thought that was very interesting to sort of take something that people, revere and respect and hold so highly, especially like nerd culture and Batman comic books, and to like shake it up and then to like take it out and use it as she pleased. But this is, so like we said, semi-autobiographical. This character, Joker the Harlequin, goes to, shakes off the shackles of Smallville, her hometown, that, and her family that she just doesn't get, a father that we never see, a mother that does everything for her child, smile, be happy, be a good kid. We're this happy, picture perfect family. Don't think too hard. Don't feel too strongly. Just smile, smile, smile. And repress it and hold it all and hold everything in, your emotions, your feelings, your thoughts, everything. So
use the like nasal, like, depression cure medicine or whatever.
Yes. Like heavy medication, to dull your senses, to dull your emotions, to just dull everything, be flat, smile, and just go through the motions. So Joker the Harlequin travels to Gotham to get on this clown show, this SNL, but it's like Gotham Night Live, but it's clowns. All these Jokers and Harlequins are putting it on, and it was like a fun, play on SNL, because SNL is, at one point in time, they were, the most progressive form of comedy on television. And what are they now? They have Donald Trump on there. So, who really respects their comedic opinions and
they're also not funny.
They're also not funny, but
I don't think Vera Drew is going to be getting
invited on
an invite to host. Yeah.
Wouldn't that be wild though?
That'd be awesome. Yeah.
Like, hey, I made fun of you guys and Lorne Michaels, and just absolutely.
Hey, I killed Lorne Michaels in my movie. What's up?
Here's my monologue.
Yeah.
While Joker the Harlequin, the protagonist, we don't get a name, which was very powerful. The Joker the Harlequin's name is bleeped out anytime anybody says their name, because it's
their dead name. Yeah,
their dead name. And so I like that we don't really know. It's like a secret identity. All of these different themes from comic books that come up, and we don't know what her dead name was or is, and it doesn't matter, because we know Joker the Harlequin. We know this person as they are introduced to us by them, which is very powerful, and it connects us to who they are in this present moment, and not who they were, or if they ever were. But this was such a funny and moving movie. I saw it with two friends, both queer and gender nonconforming, and what they got out of it is much more powerful than what I could ever hope to get out of it. But what I did feel by the end of this movie was that I felt like I had a more concrete grasp on what it means to repress yourself for the sake of others when you can't be who you truly are. Like our protagonist has a really hard life, has to, hold everything in, is told by their mother, keep smiling, be happy, and is taken to Arkham, where they're then given the mood stabilizing drugs, that like sort of laughing gas that makes everything funny and light, and, nothing hurts, that just dulls their senses. They don't feel anything. They have no emotions. They have no real memories. And it's really sad and it's awful. And I can say that I am an ally all day long, but I don't really know, like, what does that really mean? And I can say that I care for you and be who you are, be who you truly are. But again, what does that really mean? This is such a powerful expression of, or at least one powerful expression of what this person's experience as a trans woman, repressing who they truly are on the inside. There's this line where she says, I woke up every day and created myself. That just struck me and absolutely, it made me misty. I don't know what it means to be so repressed that you truly don't know who you are, and that every day you build yourself up into what you want to be. And the next day you have to do it all over again. I could never relate to that. I'll never know what that means to repress yourself so completely that there's nothing left of you, that you don't know who you are. And this movie just really opened my eyes to one person's experience. But I wonder, I hope that at the end of you guys talking about I Saw the TV Glow, you're talking about how people connected so emotionally with this story. I don't know. I don't want to know what the story is, but I hope that other people maybe felt represented and really understood in that storyline of this creating yourself, your identity, your secret identity becoming your only identity, who you truly are, mask off, and it's who you truly are underneath. So I hope people really relate to that. It was weird. A lot of the mixed media, mixed art styles, very like Tim and Eric, like comedy stylings, which is really funny. I kind of felt like this movie would be like, it kind of reminded me of like a movie that maybe you'd watch like at a friend's house at a sleepover, and it's like one that you guys would quote back and forth to each other because there's like a lot of ridiculous and like laughable lines and like good back and forth that you and a friend could do.
Great like midnight movie.
Definitely. Like it's hard to explain. I mean, or like really hard to tell the story, but it starts at 100 and it doesn't take its foot off the throttle until the very end. I mean, at one point it's even a musical. Like it does everything. It's all of her, any creative thought that's come into her mind, any form of expression, any form of any joke that could be made is made. I really like the humor. I felt like this is definitely a good starting point for where humor can go from now, or from this point on. When someone says I saw a comedy, like what does that even mean anymore? Like what's funny? I mean, don't ask Jerry Seinfeld because he's got some absolutely warped and twisted sense of humor. You can't say this anymore and you can't say that anymore, and this, that, and the other's woke in the third. So it's like, what does it even mean when you see a comedy these days? Like, what is even funny? And I think that this movie asks, like, what's funny? Like, here's what's funny. I'll tell you what is funny. Or, we can figure it out together and we'll laugh together. I really enjoyed it, sort of just like shit on all comedy that's come before it and stands tall and says, no, that's not funny anymore. And it wasn't funny to begin with. There are a couple lines where they say like, oh yeah, my comedy idols are probably Louis C.K., before all the unpleasantness. And then, just so you know, it's like, oh yeah, of course.
Of course, the unpleasantness.
Absolutely, the unpleasantness, not anymore. And then someone else is like, yeah, I guess Bill Cosby was like a big influence for me before all the unpleasantness. Like,
yeah, of course.
And so it's like, yeah, it just absolutely, it takes those things and it like shrinks them and says, that's not funny anymore. We need to stop holding ourselves to those standards and start holding ourselves to our standards. We decide what's funny now. We're the ones that's on stage. That's old news. That's old hat. And we can do so much better than that. Like, we can truly move on from them. Like, unshackle yourselves from the comedy styles of Lorne Michaels and SNL and like truly free your mind and like have your own comedic identity, completely free from any other influence that came before you. And I also really admire that. It feels so fresh and new and alive. And, as much as it's her figuring out who she is, it's her figuring out who she is as a director. Maybe there's more for Vera, but like moving away from the crutch of, celebrated or, recognizable IP like Batman and SNL. Maybe she'll move away from that and create something completely different. But this was just a fabulous starting point. Fabulous, funny, fast, sad, very emotional. There were some really poignant moments, especially when Joker the Harley Quinn is looking back on her life and reflecting on these moments that she's had with her mother, these less than comforting and less than close moments with her mother, where she just feels like she has to hide everything about herself. She's crying in one flashback and she says, I promise I won't tell you anything, Mom. I won't even tell you when I feel sad. And like, that was another line that just really like shook me. Like, it's so amazing that she can do these really like heavy, heart-wrenching, emotional moments, and then these absolutely hysterical, gut-busting moments, like back to back to back, like just flip so quick between them. But Zach, I know you saw it and you felt like you had some more things you wanted to say about it. Like, am I hitting on anything that stuck out to you, or did you have anything that you wanted to talk about?
No, I think you nailed it. Yeah, I mean, just the one thing is, just after our conversation we just had about I saw the TV glow, like I think this one also like has that like processing, like helping people process identity through media, like using the DC Batman universe to kind of process their journey through identity. I think is like to me, like I talked about it a little bit a couple weeks ago, but I found it to be really fascinating just because, at this point with like, it's kind of like when with superheroes, it's just like we reboot Spider-Man, we reboot Batman, we reboot Superman. And it's just like, we have to tell the same story over and over again. And like the newness is, oh, well, it's like a new person playing it, And I like that. Like, I like if we're going to continue with superheroes, like using that IP to do things like what Vera Drew did, where she's using those like canonical figures that you're familiar with, but in a way that explores different things and much more like personal things. Like, to me, that's way more interesting than, hey, let's make another Batman, but with a new person in it, kind of thing. And so like, just as like a quote unquote superhero movie, it's easily one of the most fascinating and interesting ones that we've had in a very long time.
Absolutely.
But I think the People's Joker, it should be probably available soon, like on streaming or rental or something like that. Please, like, definitely, it's worth checking out. It's a crazy one.
It was hard fought to get it out from what I saw. Like, they got a cease and desist or like some sort of like a warning.
Yeah, they played a midnight screening at TIFF a couple years ago. Well, we were there when it happened, but like, yeah, it played a midnight screening and then they like killed the rest of the screenings, like Warner Brothers, and then they went through this whole legal battle and finally, through like satire law, was able to get this to play. And I'm like, yeah, like this is the stuff we should be making instead of like let's get some new dipshit to put on a Superman cape, and like that's exciting. I'm like, I don't
Some
give a
other
fuck.
brunette, some
Yeah,
other
whatever.
rainbow brunette. Who cares? Who cares? Let's do something different. And it was different. It was fun. I just there were all these little bits that you could pick up. I think of recognizable figures. At the very end, Vera meets Mixelplixix, and just all these really great plays on like queer culture, like trans women, like trans culture throughout. So like instead of Mr. Mixelplixix, having it as Mix, like MX, for like something for because that's the like I don't know, prefix. What's the word instead of Mr. Miss?
Is it a title?
Title, yeah. So then you have mix when you're like gender nonconforming. So that was such like a cute and clever use of another character. So it's just like what you said, like just something fresh, innovative, interesting, unique, but still grounded in something familiar. This is groundbreaking, hilarious, hysterical. I want more. I can't wait to see more. And I hope that it gets as wide a release as I Saw the TV Glow. Two important pieces of new trans cinema, new queer cinema, new queer cinema, even more.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break, and then we will be back talking to the dead and in 1921's The Phantom Carriage after this. And we're back with part 2 of episode 475 of Cinematary. In this part, we're kicking off our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1921's The Phantom Carriage, written and directed by Victor Herstrom and based on the 1912 novel Thy Soul Shall Bear Witness. The film stars Herstrom, Hilda Borgstrom, and Tore Svinberg. On New Year's Eve, the driver of a ghostly carriage forces a drunken man to look back at his wasted life. The Phantom Carriage was released in Scandinavia on New Year's Day 1921. The following year, Metro Pictures Corporation re-edited and released the film in the United States under the title The Stroke of Midnight, and it was known as Thy Soul Shall Bear Witness in the United Kingdom. From 1917, there was a deal between Selma Langlof and A.B. Svenska Biografiteten to adapt at least one Lingerlof novel for film every year. Prior to The Phantom Carriage, Hirstrom had made 3 of those adaptations, which had all been well received by critics, the audience, and Lingerlof herself. Since all of them had taken place in a rural setting, Hirstrom felt that he wanted a change for the 4th and suggested the urban gritty Korkarlen, which is the Swedish name for The Phantom Carriage. Lingerlof was initially skeptical of adapting the novel's elements of occultism and mysticism to film, and Hirstrom was well aware of the difficulties. The script took 8 days to finish, and in April 1920, Hirstrom traveled to Lingerlof's mansion in Marbacka in Värmland to present it. After 2 hours of Hirstrom reading aloud and performing the whole script himself, Lingerlof responded by offering him dinner, which Hirstrom took as an approval. Post-production was famously long and intense due to the extensive use of special effects developed by cinematographer Julius Janssen and lab executive Eugene Hellman. Double exposures made in camera. Just an aside, optical printing was not available until the early 1930s, had been used before by Janssen already in Sir Arne's Treasure from 1919, but were here developed to be far more advanced with several layers. This allowed the ghost characters to walk around in 3 dimensions, being able to first be covered by an object in the foreground, but when in the same take walking up in front of the object, it would be seen through the ghost's semi-transparent body. One difficulty was that the cameras were hand cranked, so meaning that the camera had to be cranked at exactly the same speed in different exposures for the result to appear natural. Coming from the theater, Hirstrom rejected traditional stage acting as detrimental to films. He wanted another style of performance since the dialogue could not be heard, concentrating on facial movements, and gestures. His own performance in The Phantom Carriage avoids melodrama by admitting David's inner confusion, which simultaneously erupts into violence. His outward realism explores inner states. Some of the inner titles are actually voiceover as he talks to himself. The success of this Phantom Carriage brought the director an invitation to America, where as a revenant from his own childhood, he made two films with Lillian Gish, The Scarlet Letter in 1926 and the masterpiece The Wind in 1928. Despite the success of Hirstrom's American films, however, he returned to Sweden in 1930 at the dawn of the sound era to work in the theater, feeling perhaps that this was where speech belonged. When The Phantom Carriage opened at the Criterion Theater in New York, it was lauded for being precisely what it was not, a cautionary tale of the evils of drink. The distributor had completely edited it as The Stroke of Midnight. The legend of The Phantom Carriage didn't come in until almost halfway through the film, as Hirstrom's structure had been dismantled and the film became a straightforward narrative about the evils of alcohol. The Phantom Carriage...
Not that.
It's not that, but like, this isn't a PSA movie. The Phantom Carriage was one of Ingmar Bergman's favorites and a major influence on Wild Strawberries, which we covered in last year's Young Critics, which was Hirstrom's final performance. Quote, "It completely overwhelmed me. I was shaken to the core," Bergman said of The Phantom Carriage. Hirstrom won much praise for bringing empathy to a character who has spent his life as a cold and insulated person in Wild Strawberries. Bergman later said, "Wild Strawberries was no longer my film. It was Victor Hirstrom's." Could not find any contemporary reviews, but I feel like ending on a review by Ingmar Bergman is fair. So yeah, let's talk about The Phantom Carriage. Had any of you seen this before?
I had. It had been a couple of years, but yeah, I had.
I feel like this is one kind of in the same realm as, and I saw people comparing it. In the same realm though as like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, as like these in Nosferatu as well, as like these kind of seminal like silent era horror movies that I think still have presence today.
I think the one thing I remember from my first viewing, and maybe y'all felt this too, is that I had heard like, oh, this is the scary film, and like it is unsettling at times, but a lot of it is like drama, like domestic drama and stuff. And I thought there was going to be a whole lot more of like the ghost of the Phantom Carriage and like, you know, the flames of hell, like, and that sort of thing, kind of like Faust or something like that.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Like the 1920s version of Faust, where like you have like the flames of hell and the demons and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I mean, like some of the imagery is macabre, but it's not. It's more of like a narrative device of the film rather than the focus of the film in a lot of ways. Although some of those effects are very cool, knowing the limitations of the like how they had to film it at the time. Like there's a shot where late in the film where like basically like the ghosts, so like the double exposed part, like has to reach out and touch like a woman in a bed, and it's like crossing like the spiritual plane back into like mortal existence, and it's like matched up perfectly, and it like works extremely well, and it's very cool. Like so like some of the effect stuff is cool, but I think that before I saw this movie the first time, it has this reputation as being an effects movie, and I don't really feel like that's what it's going for that much.
So I feel like if you, instead of calling them like limitations, instead call them innovations, then it does become a very special effects heavy film. I had never seen this before. I didn't know what I was getting into. I was just very excited to watch a silent film history, and silent film is just so vastly different from, you know, what we're used to in our modern movie going experience.
I'm kind of the same way. Like I was so happy to watch this. Like you watch a silent film, especially a good one, you're just like, damn man, like these are so great.
Yeah, like I don't know. Every time I watch like a good one, I remember feeling this when I saw The Wind too, which also slaps. but I remember thinking like, why do I not watch more of these? Like
Yeah, they're so good.
like they're amazing. And it's like a
so
separate
cool.
world. Like it's almost a different medium.
Yeah,
Absolutely, it's absolutely a different medium, but it's, I mean, it's film at its infancy and at its most raw, like completely unencumbered by our modern storytelling conventions. I mean, I feel like I've heard it said before, but you can't have a flashback inside of a flashback. But at this point, in 1921, no one's saying that and nobody's done that. So then
Who says that? That's dumb.
I know, right?
I
That's
feel
like,
like Challengers does that.
hey, we're still a little lukewarm about that. But
whoa.
But I think that when you look at it that way, it's so innovative and so thought-provoking. I mean, like the flashback inside of a flashback, inside of somebody else's like dream, inside of somebody else's story, it works so well. It felt very innovative in that sense, like in a storytelling sense. Lots of close-ups. I really enjoyed those. Like what you said, Zach, in your intro, that Herstrom tried to create like an entirely different kind of acting, or like a different kind of, what did you say? Was it a different kind of acting?
It's different country, but it reminds me a little bit of like a lot of German expressionist films, where a lot of those originated from the theater with Max Reinhardt. And so like a lot of the acting, whether it's Caligari or Dr. Mabuse or Metropolis or things like that, like you're getting like a lot of the touchstones for the acting are coming from like the theater, and specifically this like type of theater. And so he's kind of doing the same thing, where he's going like, there's not going to be any sounds, there's going to be title cards, but like you need to convey the story through your face and like your gestures and stuff like that.
And through these close-ups and through the use of like background and foreground, it was absolutely thrilling. I wasn't scared, but I'm like I'm positive, were I a young maid in 1921 and I saw the Phantom Carriage, that would have like scared the mess out of me.
Released on New Year's Day too. Good timing.
Yeah,
that
would have been awesome.
Filmmakers.
Very eerie, very superstitious.
Well, like a sequence like the one when you watch the Phantom like the guy's committed suicide, and he like goes into the room and like picks up the guy's spirit and leaves. Like just the special effects of that entire sequence is incredible.
Or like the drown, is it like a sailor or something? They go underwater and like just pluck the sailor from the
soul from it.
Bottom of the ocean. That was
cool.
Cool.
It's incredible.
Compelling. Yeah, that suicide was really sad. I mean, all you needed to see was the gun, and then cut to the Phantom Carriage pulling up, and then the body on the floor. You don't need anything else, and that just tells you everything. That's another thing with silent films, is they don't have to show you everything. I mean, they're showing you so much, and then they cut for the intertitles and everything, but you still don't need to see everything, and not everything needs an intertitle. And you can still tell by people's gestures and body language and the actual acting that they're, the actual performance that they're doing, what is happening and what is being conveyed. And to see it done so well is so thrilling.
Because it's not just like basic legibility, like we can tell what's going on anyway, but like the specific acting, like we were just talking about, is like really good. Like I think what I meant, or one of the things I was going to kind of point to earlier when I said like it doesn't read as an effects film, where like the effects become a conduit through like for a much like richer experience, because like I think that this is a moving movie. Like the narrative framework is a little bit like moralistic and kind of like that like progressive era like social reform kind of way, but I think that even within that framework it is like very I don't know, like I there is something like really like emotionally profound about some elements of this movie, particularly towards the end, and like the welling up of regret in the main character, and then just the like the despair and the sadness of like the like Salvation Army woman like trying to reach out to him, and like her on her deathbed like calling to him. Like I don't know, there's on paper it can seem kind of like I don't know, like saccharine, but like the way that it's acted out, and I think that like the way that sound or a silent film works, where everything has to be shown mostly like outside of the title cards. Like I think it repurposes, or not repurposes, but it like renews like the kind of like emotional core of these kind of like moralistic tropes of like, you know, the valiant social reformer, or like the fallen like alcoholic or whatever, into something that's a lot more, I don't know, naked and compelling.
Yeah, well, I think I saw a lot of comparisons while doing research to what Victor Hederstrom did compared to, like, he gets compared a lot to D.W. Griffith and like the type of films that Griffith was making in America. And like this, and I always like to watch movies like this, especially international movies, because it kind of shows like how Griffith was somebody who ran his fucking mouth, and boasted that he invented all of these different things, and he didn't invent even half of what he said he did, because the people were doing it internationally. Just because it wasn't in Hollywood, people assumed that it wasn't happening. But you like look at this, you look at Phantom Carriage in comparison to, really most of Griffith's stuff. Like Griffith also is like doing these like kind of cautionary tale type stories. But like I think what's the difference between him, what he does, and what Hederstrom's doing, like in this, is that Hederstrom's like you say, like it's very stripped down. It's very like, David Holm is never really portrayed as like a good character. He's
a total piece of shit the whole time.
He's just a piece of shit the entire time, to even the point where, it almost feels like a cop out to a degree, that in the end, like he's able to kind of get that second chance. To me, I thought he was going to have to, he was going to go away and be the Phantom Carriage, but like, just like the steps leading up to that, you think of like, I'm thinking of like the just kind of the editing and setups that Griffith would do, where action is happening and there's a time element where the character needs to get to that place, because the action is going on, and the character needs to get there before something happens. And like just the way that Griffith structures it in like a much more, like, to take modern language, in a much more like action set piece. Like if Griffith was directing the end of the Phantom Carriage, there would be much more propelled action between David getting his spirit back and getting up and going to his wife and children to stop her from killing them all. Rather than like the way it kind of happens, where it's less like action, more just kind of like this last heave of like desperation. Like there's nothing really propelling about it. It's more just kind of like this, just like like it's just kind of like the last heave, like last chance that he gets.
It does kind of feel like the stage influence there. Like if you're used to telling stories through scenes rather than, kinetic action, like I think that it is the way that it makes sense to tell that version of the story. I think it works really well here, because you would lose something, I think, from what it's doing, like the emotional richness of what it's doing, if we were like, if we had that like kind of clock element, or like intercutting, to build suspense or whatever. I think that the way that it's done, just nakedly presents like, here's the like depths of like this kind of like emotional like turmoil, and you just kind of sit in it, rather than there being a lot of movement toward resolving it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Go ahead, Grace.
Oh no, I agree, because also I felt like another moment of like energy and suspense and thrill, and like a really thrilling moment, was when Mrs. Holm and the children are going to leave the second time, when Sister Edith has reunited David and his family, and he's like, we'll change, but he won't, and he comes back drunk, and she locks him in the separate room, and while he's locked in the separate room, she's dressing up the children to leave. They're right there, they're in the same space, like in just a door between the two of them, and there's not a whole lot of cutting back and forth between the action. I mean, yes, he's like chopping down this door, but the camera just kind of holds on Mrs. Holm for a little bit, and while she's like buttoning up child's dress, but also just kind of like frozen in fear, and you like watch you watch all these emotions kind of like run over her face, fear for her children, fear for her own life, fear of her husband. This is and this sort of like frozen, like that door's not going to hold, he's busting through, like why did I even try, I've just made him even more angry, what is he going to do next? But we just hold on her for a little bit. It's some cutting, but not as much.
It's not Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall in The Shining, which is takes the influence from.
Yeah, for real.
Side note, this is why this and that and the other and the third is why this series, Young Critics Watch, is so important, because I said this last year, but I'll say it again. This art doesn't exist in a vacuum. Every movie
this is where Kubrick got it.
This is where he got it, right? But it's so nice it's so satisfying and gratifying to see where these influences come from. Every movie is in conversation with the movie that came before it. So last year we did Wild Strawberries, and watching this, I'm like, God, I'm getting a lot of Wild Strawberry feel from this. And I'm like, this feels getting a lot of Wild Strawberries from this. Put it together.
There's also, you also have the influences. If you look more at Bergman's work, just like the Phantom character, very similar to the character of Death in Seventh Seal.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so it's so gratifying to see the influences to all these movies that we know and love. This series is kind of like Homework, the series, the movie, but it's still very special and very powerful. But I really love that scene. That was, to me, the most like haunting and horror element of this whole movie, not the Phantom, because the Phantom is a friendly. I mean, it's his friend George's. It's his friend
George's, who like is drinking and being merry, and then they're like, George's, what's your problem on New Year's Eve? And he's just like, I don't want to do fucking anything if I die.
Yeah. If I can't move from this bed,
it's just like, don't do anything. If you die, it sucks.
It's so sad. But he kind of felt like he felt like a friendly ghost at that point. I saw that the author, who wrote an original novel, like there's elements of like Dickens' Christmas Carol, just in terms of like very much in like the here, let's look at your life before we make a decision on whether you're dead or not type thing. And I'm sure Capra picked up on Phantom Carriage, of course, and it's so exciting. It's so exciting to see how, one excellent, superb film spawns a dozen other superb films, and the sort of like hand on the shoulder guiding these directors and writers and artists creating new art. But this just feels as fresh as the day it was made. I mean, as much as I've seen the movies that have been influenced by this, I don't think I've still ever seen anything like this.
Well, it's like an interesting. Go ahead.
Oh, just, do you know what I'm saying? That's all. I just want to ask.
Yeah, I think working off of your point, Grace, also like I think we talked about it a little bit at the beginning, like the fact that it's not limitations, but like those limitations create innovations, and honestly, like I was so excited about a lot of like the special effects techniques in this, because it's just so like, I think it's easy. Like that's why like I've always loved this series, especially in the 20s to 40s kind of category, when you like go real far back, especially when we were doing like a English language and a foreign film, where we were getting 6 movies pre 1940s. Like that was like just kind of seeing like how they were able to kind of create tension or drama, or just create some surreal abilities. I mean, this is 1921. They were doing this 20, 30, 20, 25 years before this, with whether it was Georges Méliès or the Lumiere brothers, like, just that kind of stuff. And it's always like, now it may seem kind of kitschy, but I'm like, no, like that's that's like they're trying to like they're trying to elicit some reaction out of you as a modern movie would do with some sort of special effect or something like that. They're just kind of there's something just like much more satisfying about this, because it's like you kind of had to like, I don't know, it's like you got to use your hands and like be creative that way. It's like, you're not typing into a computer. It's like you got to like come up with something much more like tangible.
I do think that there's like an interesting like cyclical element to film, because it's especially when you get to like come to like effects and like technique, like film is never stable in that regard, like as a medium. Like there's always new innovations, and those innovations tend to crowd out like older stuff, like double exposure. I mean, like, when's the last like contemporary like mainstream film to like actually use double exposure like as a sincere technique? And so like you get like a kind of, when people saw the Phantom Carriage and like these early movies, they were seeing stuff that they had never seen before. And in a certain way, like as a modern viewer, you go back and it's like stuff you've never seen before either, just in the other direction, where it feels strange and alien because of how we've grown to used to film being in the 21st and 20th century, like late 20th century. Like, you know, just having like lengthy, like single takes of like in camera, like double exposure effects, like is in some way like something that you would never see in your life unless you sought out films from this era, or maybe a little bit later. And I think that that's really neat, that because of the instability of like film technique, as it's constantly driven by new technology or new ideas or whatever, that older films get this kind of freshness to them after a while, because you're like unearthing like old technology basically. That's cool.
What did we've talked a little bit about him, but I guess more explicitly, what did y'all make of like the performance by Victor Hirstrom, as well as just some of the like his wife and the actor who played George's the Phantom?
Compelling.
Yeah.
Extremely compelling. Everybody really held their own in front of the camera. These were all very talented and interesting performances. Nothing felt I mean, like this is acting like I've never seen. I feel like sometimes we can complain about our more modern actors, how they feel a little stiff, or maybe they aren't very good at conveying certain emotions, or these two characters lack chemistry. And it does just feel like, because for a lot of these actors, they don't have any background in the stage. And I wonder if everybody acting in this movie, like Hirstrom, had a theatrical background. So they had some sort of technique and grounding underneath them to then inform them, in front of the camera. But everybody plays big and plays small. They play big in the wide shots. They play small on the close-ups. Like they're still filling the screen. Even with the tiny motions. I like one thing in particular. This is just like off the top of my head, at the Salvation Army rally, where they pray and they save Gustafson, and Edith meets Mrs. Holm. Just a nobody character walks up to Victor and then just kind of points up at him, and another thing, like. And I know that means take off your hat, and Victor, oh, okay. And he takes off his hat. And it's just like in these gestures that they can convey so much to us in pantomime. And, the acting is just so solid, and you have to watch. And there's no looking away. There's no put this on in the background. You have to watch because every performance conveys something, to the big gestures of no. I can't go see Sister Edith, the head shaking, the whole body moving, the hands, making a sort of like a universal no sign, to the small like hand wringing, or when Sister Edith like finishes mending the coat, she's massaging her fingers. Like every inch of the actor's body is used in the frame, and conveys so much.
Yeah, well, I think kind of, we talked a lot about like, especially what special effects look like in this movie compared to like modern, and how like kind of going back and forth between that is interesting. I think acting as well, because yeah, like a lot of the actors here are coming from the stage, and then as you move along, especially like in Hollywood, not it's the stage, it's vaudeville, it's things like that, but then also like it's a lot of people coming from like silent movies. So then you have like that string of movies where people, even though it's in sound, like you kind of have like that background in silent movies to kind of bring that. I think of like somebody like Lillian Gish, and like Night of the Hunter, who incredibly famous silent actress, and that's like a sound movie, but like she gives this very like silent movie performance through like her face and her gestures and her movements. And to me, it's kind of fascinating thinking about acting today, which now is like a couple of trees coming down from like method acting, and like this new age of acting that really developed in like the 60s and 70s, the 50s 60s and 70s, like outside, like kind of trying to build off of the movie and television and theater as it kind of like modernized a little bit. And it's not better or worse, but it's just much more. I think about a lot of movie acting now, and it's very much like built through self, rather than like, because I feel like that's what visual, like movies are very visual, but that's an obvious thing. It's not it's not like theater. It's not like you're having to kind of react with this camera, and the camera is really dictating everything. And it's just, I feel like the acting seems much more in line with reacting to the camera and something like this, and that's why it's so effective, because it's playing off of that, rather than contemporary acting that's very much you know it's just this new evolved form that seems it's close to the camera, but at the same time just feels very different.
I think also, like, I remember as a child, like I watched a lot of older movies as a child because my parents would put them on and stuff. And I remember always, me and my sister and brother would like kind of make fun of acting. Like not silent acting because we weren't watching silent films, but like, the like pre-method, sort of stuff, with like your transatlantic accents and like the kind of like showy,
You watch like Cary
flourish.
Grant and John
Yeah,
Wayne
right.
and Katharine
Yeah, like
Hepburn.
Carrie. Exactly. And we would make fun of those because to them, or to us,
No.
they felt like silly and artificial. And I think that as I've grown older, I've started to think the opposite in a lot of ways of specifically silent acting. And people do like lampoon silent acting quite a bit as well. Like people who know, there's, a million like parodies of like silent acting. Like Mel Brooks has like the silent movie and like, all that sort of stuff. And that's like good fun. But I also think that like one thing that is like in my mind actually better, like, because I agree it's not like better or worse necessarily, but one thing that's actually better in old films is that there's a sincerity to the acting. And I think like now, like modern audiences react against that sincerity. Like they do not like the like in the same way that people kind of like have a stick up their butt about like melodrama as like this kind of nebulous concept of like when the emotions get too like heightened or whatever, like I think that sometimes old acting, I think we view it as artificial because we've been conditioned to have these kind of like cool and ironic like gestures in contemporary acting. We've been trained to say that that's more realistic because it's more, interior, or it's more controlled or subtle or whatever we want to say. But sometimes people aren't that. I mean, like there's a lot of people who like, in real life just like act like embarrassingly and messily emotional in ways that don't always look cool or cinematic in like a kind of modern contemporary lens. And I think that like silent film acting is much more unguarded when it comes to that sort of thing. And I think this movie in particular, because it is like all sincerity. Like, as much of a piece of shit as Hirstrom's character is, like, he's not like duplicitous as a character, right? It's not like, like we can think of like other like anti-hero characters like Tony Soprano or like a like even like a I don't know, whatever the heck, like a James Stewart in like Vertigo or something like that, where like there's meant to be a contrast between how they present themselves and like who we know that they are. But that never occurs in Phantom Carriage. Like it's always like who they are that's like at the forefront. There's none of that like irony between like interior and exterior. Or there's none of, and in fact, like when he feels rotten about things, he just outwardly feels rotten about things and shows it. And then he'll like flip and be like vindictive and violent again, like in the same scene a lot of times. And that's really interesting that like, there's no, like whatever interiority exists in these characters gets externalized completely and just acted upon. And that's something that like a modern actor would never do. Like you would not see him like weeping and like groveling like on the floor about how much he regrets his life in a contemporary film. Like
it's I mean it's kind of an obvious reason why, because the lack of sound, like it's not like they can monologue, it's not like they can have like a long sequence where they explain something. Like they have to express the emotion somehow, and like this is the only form that they can do that. But I agree though, and I feel like now like they be like a lot of movies. I think it just shows like a lot of the limitations of a lot of directors. Like that's why over the last number of years I've just grown in like so much appreciation of like how fucking talented Steven Spielberg is. Because he's just such a great cinematic director that he knows how to like get the right shot that like is wordless. Like I think that a lot of directors become so reliant on like the script, and a lot of actors become so like reliant on the script that we lose our reliance on just like the basic cinematic tenets of just like how to make a shot, not only just like how to shoot a shot, but also like how to express emotion or express a point without having to have somebody fucking say it.
Right. Well, and Spielberg's such a great example because like he's like Frank Capra, he's like shameless in the sense of like, I mean, he has movies where he does like use like irony and presents like emotions that are like complicated and like whatever. Like I think AI is a great example of that. But in a lot of his movies, and he gets a lot of flack for this, like a lot of his movies are unabashedly sentimental and having characters externalize like emotions in very straightforward ways that like drives some people up the wall about Steven Spielberg. But I think that that's like a great strength of his, is that he's not embarrassed of that kind of like old like kind of showmanship regarding like
it's effective
films. Yeah, it works, man.
It works.
And it works for 1920s silent film as well.
Yeah. Any final thoughts before we wrap up on Phantom Carriage?
You guys better watch out this New Year's Eve, though.
Yeah.
Be careful.
Lord, let my soul reach maturity before I am reaped. Is that the prayer?
God, that's my final thought. Nothing beats, let me just tell you, nothing beats that being the final, like him embracing his family who almost just died. He almost died, and saying that word exactly, cut to black, and then it says slut. It's amazing.
I looked it up. I Google translated that. I was like, is this really the like what the end is in Swedish? And like Google Translate could not decide like what it actually means, because I put the end and then translated it into Swedish, and it was not slut. And I put slut into Swedish, and it gave me something different, like clothes. Or
It was
something
really
like
fun because it's just like this emotional moment. He's like sitting there all like crying, embraced, and he's just like, let me grow before I reap. And it's just black, and it's just slut.
This is great.
It's amazing. It's
We
worth
need to make
watching just for that.
more movies in Swedish with an ending title card, just so that we can do that.
No, any movies. Let's just do all movies like that. Like I want.
Yeah, you know how they have like Finn, like Fiend or whatever. Like forget
Finn.
Latin.
Yeah.
Forget Latin. Swedish.
Fuck
from
Latin.
now on.
No, like yeah, like I want at like the end of like the next Michael Bay movie, it just say like slut.
Feels a little friendly. Like, what? How do you know?
Yeah, love
Shucks.
10 out of 10 just for that. All right. Well, that'll wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, on Twitter and Instagram at handle @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where we list the movies that we talked about in this episode. If you'd like to support the show, we always appreciate your patronage on patreon.com/Cinematary. Thank you so much to our patrons: Cam, Ron Hayes, Tanner Huskins, Teresa Marsathi, and Tyler Chandler. We appreciate your patronage. Next week, we're going to continue our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series. We're going to get a little surreal, and we're going to 1930s L'Age d'Or, or The Age of Gold, which is a honestly, I'm excited because it's a mashup of Louis Buñuel and Salvador Dali. So
it's a hoot. Have you seen it?
I have not. I'm excited.
Oh man, it's good.
So
tune in, everybody.
Yeah. Until then, thanks everybody for listening, and slut.